China to become a high income country no later than the end of 2023, according to economists. So you got a abundant policy toolbox, stability pledges, and that make nation a locomotive for global growth. So I'm sure you guys sort of already heard this news by now, but uh, China is going to be. I'm not sure when they're going to officially announce it, but it will probably be announced next year by the end of next year or the year after that it's a high income country. So 2024 at the latest, and China will join the ranks of the of the developed world, basically. So, could the Chinese economy sail through the year 2022? The world's second largest economy, so second largest in exchange rate value terms. In terms of purchasing power parity, China's by far the world's largest economy. So, somewhere from 31 to 33 trillion by that measure, compared to the United States' 22 trillion. So, it is well positioned to land at a growth rate above 5% this year. And the country is on trajectory to become a high income country no later than the end of 2023. So this is what Chinese economists are saying. Skepticism has increased in recent days after Beijing released slower GDP growth of 4% in the last quarter of 2021, which prompted several international organizations, including the IMF, to cut China's 2022 GDP growth forecast. Some economists pointed to further softness in the property and consumption sectors, while some Western politicians vilified China's zero-tolerance COVID strategy, hinting at tremendous pain, which is ironic because this is the exact same policy that has allowed China the 8% growth it had for 2021. So, and while Western economies are pretty much not even growing basically at this point. The above-mentioned remarks from renowned Chinese economists coming after a slew of key interest rate cuts in recent weeks to shore up the economy also offer a much-needed assurance to placate the market against the backdrop of the U.S. Federal Reserve's indication of a looming interest rate hike that sends a tightening turnaround in global monetary policy. Analysts said that in stark contrast to elsewhere in the world, China's abundant policy toolbox and stability pledge will continue making it a haven for investment and a locomotive for global growth in the coming years. So, what does it mean by China's abundant policy toolbox and I guess stability pledge doesn't need further elaboration. But what does abundant policy toolbox exactly mean? So, according to depending on who you ask, it's going to be different answers, and most of them are pretty valid. So for me, what I'll address is abundant policy toolbox. So this is in regards to economic growth in general. So China does create credit. Probably around 23 to 25% of GDP, and this is targeted towards productive investment. So basically, infrastructure, manufacturing, research and development, stuff like that. So it's a pretty broad category, and anything that falls under those three brackets counts as well, of course. So right now, although China has very, very impressive infrastructure, they still do need to continue to build a vast infrastructure network. Still, like they still need to expand big time. So there's still a lot of infrastructure they need to build, and And really, infrastructure, it's not like you just build it on and stop it there. You got to continuously maintain it and stuff like that. So that's just basic stuff we all know. So you gotta earmark some funds for that as well, and also, of course, expanding to new infrastructure. So China has some overcapacity in some key sectors, which they will offload onto the rest of the world using the Belt and Road Initiative. So other countries get infrastructure for cheap. And so on the western side of China, there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. It needs to be on par with the east, and connectivity between both sides of the country matter a lot as well, of course. So that's on the infrastructure side. Manufacturing, obviously, you got Made in China 2025. They're well on their way to achieving their goals for that year. A program to pretty much upgrade China's manufacturing. So with 60 factories, factories that are pretty much autonomous, they run 24/7. No humans needed, and basically production and as a byproduct, revenue will soar. Of course, e-commerce market that's being developed along. That's more like a byproduct of China's massive, interconnected, well connected market. So they need to develop something like that for efficiency's sake. And yeah, so that's abundant policy toolbox. Obviously, they have the ability to. They don't have political gridlock, so they can go ahead with projects. Pretty much the CPC is pretty much. I guess only like a gridlock they would be like some controversial policies. But when it comes to like policies that are pretty like obvious, sorry, that are obviously good, like say high speed rail expansion into rural areas, or just general infrastructure stuff, then obviously there won't be much contention there. So they can get through that pretty fast. And now that they're focusing on high development, high quality growth instead of just high growth, so they prioritize like living standards and stuff like that. Stuff that are people-centric economic policies from now on. Justin Lin Yifu, former chief economist of the World Bank and a member of the Standing Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, National Committee, what a name, said he is confident that China's economy will be able to grow around 6% in 2022. So 6% is their goal, basically, as they transition towards renewable, sustainable civilization in harmony with nature, stuff like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that China is stuck at 6% growth. What it means is that for now they're focusing on other things other than growth, but they could come back to way higher growth in the future. And the country will continue to be a driver of growth in the world in the coming decades. Lin made the remarks at an event held by the China Public Diplomacy Association on Thursday, themed the current situation and future of the Chinese economy. He predicted that China's 1.4 billion will walk through the threshold of high-income country either this year or next year. So I'm predicting next year, obviously, which marks a landmark achievement in human history. So yeah, this is the first time that pretty much a continental nation has achieved. There's only two continental-sized nations, being China and India, but yeah, this is the first time that a continental-sized nation has achieved high income levels, and for 1.4 billion people, that's incredibly impressive. There were only two economies that had successfully made strides from low income to high income since World War II: Thailand and Taiwan and South Korea. Chinese mainland could be a third. Technically, he's incorrect. So since World War II, pretty much all the Asian tigers, as well as Japan, right after World War II, were low-income economies. And so yeah, that's Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, yeah, Taiwan and South Korea are listed. So mainland China would be the fifth, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be the fifth. He noted that this means by that time, about 34% of the world's population will be living in high-income countries, more than double the current level of around 16% here. In 2021, China's GDP per capita was around 12,551, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, nearing that of a high-income country, as defined by the World Bank, and overtaking the global average GDP per capita of 12,100. This is a symbolic significance for a developing country. It is relatively easy to become a middle-income country, but staging on and transitioning into a high-income economy is quite difficult, as most of them get mired in the middle-income trap during the process. The middle-income trap, pretty evident by the name what it is. The most common examples used are the Philippines, Indonesia, I guess Malaysia, but not really. Russia, I guess, as well. Again, not really. And nowadays, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So pretty much all of South Asia. And Thailand as well. So those are the economies most commonly associated with the middle income trap. He predicted that China is highly likely to achieve a growth rate above 5% this year, and expansion could pick up from the second half. China usually announces its annual GDP target during two sessions held in March. So yeah, so China would be the latest one to escape the middle income trap. The forecasts of two influential economists came after several international organizations and investment banks had downgraded China's GDP forecasts. So you got all the figures there. Oops, got the figures there. So they stated the risk of the Omicron variant. Others include financial stress among property developers. This is the Evergrande fiasco / personal consumption and pandemic-induced disruptions related to China's zero tolerance COVID-19 policy. So regarding all of these, maybe the West should have a really good look at itself. Amid threefold pressures ranging from supply shock, weakened expectations, and demand contractions, which China acknowledged in the tone-setting Central Economic Work Conference held in December. Economists told the Global Times that some of the concerns are justified, yet they fail to reflect the complete picture of China's structural growth potential and the Chinese government's readiness to stimulate the economy. So, yes, pretty straightforward. It's exactly that. The CPC isn't afraid to do whatever it takes to stimulate the economy. They don't really care about capitalist interests, so of course they're not beholden to that. So one of the priorities for government work in the first half of 2022 is to otherwise stabilize infrastructure investment. So that's what I mentioned before. noting that authorities will be gearing up to a more proactive fiscal policy. So we can expect some credit expansion in China's um, fiscal policy. So this is all regarding the hype from the West about the zero infection policy stuff. Obviously, China has proven by the results that it is superior to whatever the hell the West is doing right now. So Lin estimated that from 2019 to 2035, China still has a potential of annual 8% growth. Yeah, I agree. I think me and my mentor both think that it's potentially much higher than that. It could potentially reach 20%, if they really wanted to chase after growth, but I don't think that is their goal, so we probably won't see that. We have the highest savings in the world, and the ratio of government deficit as a percentage of GDP is among the lowest. We have resources for investment, and China will be able to maintain high investment growth, Lin said, indicating more government spending. China's monetary and fiscal easing is already underway. At a meeting with the Li Keqiang, I think that's how it's pronounced, vowed to scale up the adjustment of cross-cycle macro policies, strengthen targeted coordination, and take effective measures to cope with difficulties and stabilize market expectations. So generally all the stuff that they usually do, plus a little bit more. He plans to go after the central bank lowered mortgage lending benchmark. He pledges to come after the central banks last week lowered mortgage lending benchmark rates by 10 basis points for the first time in nearly 2 years. In making the rare move, the central bank also pledged to open the monetary policy toolbox wider to maintain the stability of total credit. So they're willing to experiment and stuff, basically. China is not pulling any punches, and the country is one of the few economies in the world that is not rattled by high inflation and has more room for policy maneuvers to buttress its economy. Former Vice Director of the Beijing Economic Operation Association told on Thursday, "We could expect more pro-growth policies to unwind and even a milder adjustment of the yuan's exchange rate." So this was kind of what I was expecting before. Like once they complete the transition to the MIC 2025, what they were planning to achieve then, I was expecting much faster growth policies being implemented. On the other hand, the Western world, led by the US, is plagued by the pressure to rein in inflation and has emptied the toolbox to shore up growth. US Federal Reserve said on Wednesday that an interest rate hike will soon be appropriate, and analysts expect the hike could come in March. So this is just a small update on China's economic situation right now. It's looking really good, and we'll have more to come in the future.